Planning to get an edge in your field of business or for your enterprise? Well, how about a sustainable one? One which is not harmful to the planet or the society. I'm Fernando and welcome to your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes. This is BISNOMICS. Talking of sustainability, the age-old Milton Friedman statement that the business of business should be only business is something no longer valid. At least the 21st century leaders are expected to do business in a way that protects the planet, that preserves the planet for the future generations. After all, the lungs of the earth, the Amazons, are said to be becoming a savanna over the next 10 years. At the same time, massive levels of pollution are thrusting cities like Delhi into a chaos. Amidst all this, how sustainable is your business strategy? To talk about this and more details on this very pertinent topic, we have today with us an expert who is returning to BISNOMICS, who is none other than Dr. Ravi Fernando, who is the Chairman CEO of the Global Strategic Corporate Sustainability Private Limited. At the same time, he is an executive in residence at INSEAD, obtained sustainability-related qualifications from the University of Cambridge, and a board director of leading boards in Sri Lanka and worldwide. Dr. Ravi, welcome back to BISNOMICS. Absolute pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much, Tarinder. Looking forward to this discussion.
Indeed. It's not every day we get the company of a world-class Sri Lankan who is sought after by the whole world for his expertise. Thank you very much for being here.
I think Sri Lanka is slowly but surely beginning to understand sustainability in a much better way, and I think we need to build a few more leaders to achieve this 21st century thinking.
Absolutely. So, let me start off with a very interesting discussion on something where we left last year. Now, last year when we met and we were discussing about climate change and the direction in which climate change was heading and so on. Now, we are meeting almost slightly after 1 year. Where are we as a world in terms of climate change today?
Tarinder, I think the first thing I would say is we are no longer in a climate change scenario. We are in a climate emergency scenario. And in November this year, when the United Nations General Assembly met, prior to the COP26 meeting we just concluded a few days back, he called this...
If I may reiterate, COP, Conference of Parties 26. The
Congregation of Parties.
Congregation of Parties.
Which is a UN initiative started in 1996. So the United Nations Secretary General called this a code red for humanity. And I'm sure you're familiar with the term code red. Code red is the
usually not something good.
It is the ultimate emergency. So why did he call the situation of the climate emergency a code red for humanity? And he was urging mostly national leaders and business leaders to understand the seriousness of what we are facing today. And he was doing this just before the COP meeting in Glasgow. And the prognosis as at now, post-COP, is that the World Meteorological Organization and the IPCC, which are the two report functioning bodies, have confirmed that we are staring at a world that is going to be crossing a plus 1.5 degrees centigrade from a base year of 1880 in the next 5 to 7 years. And post-COP, the figure that people are now talking about is a plus 2.4 to 2.7 degrees centigrade. And the implication of that is what is missed out most times. Everyone is talking about let's keep temperatures below 1.5. But people aren't talking about why that is needed. So here's the reason why. If you look at the IPCC report of 2018, it clearly says if the planet crosses a plus 1.5 degrees centigrade from a base year of 1880 when the Industrial Revolution started, we are looking at a global economic meltdown or an impact to the global economy due to sea level rise of about 20 feet of about $54 to $67 trillion. Now, why is that important? It's important because the global economy as at now is $90 trillion.
More than half. So.
More than half of it is going to get wiped out. Not overnight, it is going to gradually get wiped out.
And so I believe that some of the countries like Maldives will be heavily threatened as well.
Most
Coastal.
southern hemisphere island nations are absolutely threatened. But what is also interesting is that not only the southern hemisphere nations, almost all the key coastal cities of the world, starting from New York to Miami to London to Shanghai to Mumbai to Colombo, majority of these cities are going to be threatened when sea levels rise 20 feet. So
Dr. Ravi,
it's a crisis.
if I may interrupt at this point. Now, aren't we seeing the effects of this already happening? We saw temperatures in Greece hitting close to the 50s. We saw some of the worst forest fires and the wildfires happening in Australia, where billions of reptiles had been killed. So the impact not only is economically devastating, it leads to further biodiversity damage, which again leads to the further environmental and climate change negatively getting impacted. Isn't this like a vicious cycle that is already in action?
Absolutely. So when we talk of the climate emergency, the key word that everyone is using, and I would prefer to now call it the code red for humanity as per Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General. So how did we end up in a climate emergency? How did we end up in this code red for humanity? So in 1987, with the Brundtland Report, which was the first report commissioned by the United Nations to look at the impacts of our industrialization on the climate, they were able to pinpoint it and say, as we continue to burn more and more fossil fuels, so what are fossil fuels? Coal is the #1 fossil fuel that is having the most devastating effect on the planet, followed by all petroleum, so petrol, diesel, all of that. And then even natural gas. People tend to think that natural gas, because of the word natural, is not a fossil.
Harmless.
Is harmless. But I can tell you, the burning of these fossil fuels have increased from 1980s to about 20 gigatons of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases, today to 33.9 gigatons. In other words, we have crossed a massive, we have nearly coming close to doubling it. Our carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere have moved from about 280 parts per million in the 1980s to now 420 parts per million. So this is now, we are setting ourselves up for a massive heating of the planet, because what has happened is, as we kept burning fossil fuels, they are trapped in the Earth's atmosphere. And as we trap the heat is now impacting the oceans, heating up the oceans, and tornadoes and hurricanes are forming in the oceans, coming and
more
hitting
severe and intense ones.
Much more severe and intense ones. And we now have what is known as extreme weather incidents.
Correct.
As reported in the World Economic Forum top 10 risks. #1 risk is as noted as extreme weather incidents in both 2020 and 2021. So what are extreme weather incidents? I suppose that's then the obvious next question. So, and how do we feel extreme weather incidents?
Correct.
So there are 3 ways we feel the extreme weather incidents. #1, the planet warms up. And as the planet warms up, we are talking of temperatures that, like you just mentioned, going way beyond the 40, 50 degree mark. In fact, California recorded 55 degrees centigrade. The Arctic and the Antarctic, which are supposed to be the coldest places on the planet,
Correct,
were crossing 20 degrees and 37 degrees centigrade in the last 3 to 4 months.
And Dr. Ravi, I believe last year, the summer of last year was the last summer that the Arctic would have ice. And that they said afterwards, in the summertime, the temperatures would be so high that the Arctic would not be having ice.
We are now staring at a situation where the North Pole, the South Pole, and the Mid Pole, which are the Himalayas, in the next 5 to 10 years, we might not have any of them because of the warming of the planet.
So ecological Armageddon, is that the correct term to use?
Ecological Armageddon is upon us. And the heating of the planet is the first kind of extreme weather incident. So one of the research reports that came out recently said that in the next 5 to 10 years, the Middle East is going to be unlivable because temperatures will be going to 45 to 50 degrees centigrade. And the BBC now runs a program called Living in a 50 degree centigrade Planet. Why are they talking about this? Because the first extreme weather incident is heat. Heat leads to drought because the heat basically wipes out and encourages the precipitation of whatever water that we have around.
Correct.
And also warms the planet, and which leads to acidification of the planet. So the second extreme weather incident that stems from the heating of the planet due to burning fossil fuels is that we then have what are known as droughts. And the third and final incident is we then have tornadoes, hurricanes, and extreme weather incidents in terms of rainfall and flooding. And 81% of all extreme weather incidents in the world are actually ending up in flooding and droughts, because as the heat wipes up and mops up the atmospheric water and moves it up to the clouds, now the clouds come raining back on us, and the hurricanes come and hit us, and then we end up with flooding.
The era of stable weather, which came into being about 10,000 years ago, which defines all these seasons and the different seasons for agriculture, seasons for tourism, etc. All these things can get wiped out over the next few years. Dr. Ravi, I need to question you on this matter about the COP26. There's a lot of huff and puff about it, a lot of media coverage about it, but what were the end outcomes of it? And let me be very frank in this question. Was there anything useful coming out of that conference?
Okay, so what is COP26? It's the 26th time since 1996 where world leaders and world business leaders, national leaders, and a whole bunch of lobbyists also ended up at this meeting, lobbying, of course, for the continuance of fossil fuels. In fact, there were more lobbyists on fossil fuels than any one single delegation this year. And that is one of the features of COP26. So what were we expecting at COP26? What we were expecting in Glasgow was, number one, an acknowledgement of the reports that have been presented by the IPCC and the WMO, the World Meteorological Organization, that we are now staring at a plus 1.5 degrees happening in the next 3 to 5 years. And thereafter, moving to 2.7 to 2.4 degrees centigrade. And as a result, we thought all world leaders will take this problem seriously enough to curtail and move very rapidly to exit fossil fuels. So now comes the answer to your question, which is, so what did COP deliver? The expectation of the UN Secretary General by calling this a code red for humanity was to say, you know, he also went to the extent of saying, if we don't do something, we'll be digging our own grave. These are words used by him, not by me. So what happened in COP was we expected people to say, okay, let's end the use of coal. Let's start having a very aggressive exit plan for fossil fuels. Let's accelerate and invest in renewables. That was the expectation. However, unfortunately, none of this really happened. And from the first COP meeting in 1996 to the current COP meeting in 2021 November, we've had 26 occasions. And one thing that has happened consistently in these 26 occasions is the date and timing for the exiting of fossil fuels has been postponed at every COP meeting. And as opposed to saying we are facing an emergency, they kept postponing this. And once again, they postponed the exiting of fossil fuels, which is the cause of the code red for humanity, which was at the Paris Agreement was, let's exit fossil fuels by 2030 and get to 80% driven by renewable energy in most nations by 2030. Now they've kicked that figure down, the can down the road as we call it, and moved that date to any time between 2050 and 2070.
So in the words of Greta Thunberg, blah, blah, blah.
Blah, 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 and not only blah, blah, blah. Basically what is very, very sad about what happened at COP26 was even looking at exiting coal, which was now the priority for COP26, even that was watered down due to the interventions by Saudi Arabia, by India, and Australia, and even China, which actually objected to any terminology which looked at exiting fossil fuels.
Dr. Fernando, we are going to come back to more details on this after the break. Stay tuned. We will be back after this short break. This is BISNOMICS. Welcome back to BISNOMICS. We are in conversation with Dr. Ravi Fernando on the very pertinent topic of sustainability. Dr. Ravi, please do continue your thoughts on the recent developments from COP26.
Okay, so basically COP26 ended up making what I would term at best frivolous commitments. By postponing action on the climate emergency, what all we have done is now ensured the world is going to be hit by the plus 1.5 degrees centigrade to 2.4 degrees to 2.7 degrees centigrade in the next 10 to 15 years, which means there is going to be devastation, unheard of devastation. Sri Lanka is right now experiencing unprecedented extreme weather incidents. We couldn't even get to Kandy recently because of the earth slips. And this is going to be the new normal we are going to be faced with. And I must also mention that one of the key things that came out of COP was this massive amount of lobbyists trying to stop the movement and exiting of fossil fuels, which is the cause of the climate emergency. And many companies who are in the fossil fuel business, starting with Saudi Aramco, companies like ExxonMobil, companies like Chevron, BP, Shell, absolutely stood their ground and wanted to make sure that this never happens. Basically putting profit before planet and not realizing that we are basically contributing to a massive destruction of the global GDP to the tune I just mentioned. And not only that, we also saw a lot of the key banks in the world even though in 2015 they agreed that we will not be supporting fossil fuel projects in the future, you found that the JP Morgans, the Wells Fargos, the Bank of America, Citibank Group, including British banks like HSBC, Standard Chartered, Barclays, Mitsubishi Bank, Sumitomo Bank, Deutsche Bank, have invested trillions of dollars in fossil fuel projects and yet continue to do so. So there are many a corporate out there in the fossil fuel businesses and also in the banking businesses who continue to be actually supporting and virtually being part of creating the climate emergency and the code red for humanity. So this is the reality that we face with.
So, Dr. Fernando, if I may interject here. Now, we are clear on the impact that the world is going to have from this. Let's talk about the business implications. What kind of business implications are we expecting as the world is thrown into this climate turmoil?
Okay, Tarindo, I think this is an important question. Most of my work is centralized in Europe. And as you know, with INSEAD being in France, and also a lot of my work is in Luxembourg and Ireland and UK. And one of the points I want to make very clear to you and to everyone who is listening in is that unfortunately a majority of the business leaders we have in the world today have not been schooled or brought up to speed with the climate emergency or the code red for humanity. They somehow think that it's the government's role to, national role to sort this out. But the bottom line is they are going to be all impacted by the devastation of the global economy. And one of the key areas that the world is going to see a massive impact on is supply chains. So any company that is depending on any supply chain, whether it's agricultural supply chains or any supply chains, is going to be in trouble. So,
and Dr. Ravi, all companies are dependent on supply chains one way or the other.
One way or another.
At least you need input, you need to send your product to the market. Two key parts of the value chain, inbound logistics, outbound logistics.
Absolutely. So now you're going to have a devastation unprecedented in supply chains. I mean, even in a small way, we are having devastation in supply chains of agriculture in Sri Lanka.
Yes.
As you can see, the whole vegetable crisis. But besides that, we are now talking of massive supply chain issues. Taiwan, which is one of the world's leaders in developing chips and capacitors, weren't able to supply the chips anymore because drought hit their production.
Correct.
So we are now going to see a massive impact on supply chain management. And if the leadership of companies, if the boards of companies don't begin to think in a 21st century manner, where you begin to understand that unless you are able to be part of the solution and not part of the pollution of the climate emergency, because most companies continue to pollute and use fossil fuels for their energy requirements, their transportation requirements, logistics requirements. And unless every company on the planet begins to have leaders who are able to be part of the solution, and when I talk about leaders at a global scale, I would highlight people like Elon Musk and Tesla. All their companies are trying to bring sustainable solutions to the planet.
Google is today running in a completely sustainable manner.
Google 24/7 strategy is about being 100% renewable energy driven. It's already there. Same with Tesla and even companies like Patagonia, where Yvon Chouinard actually started Patagonia 40, 50 years back and said, we are not in the business of continuously selling new clothing and new items.
Yeah.
We want to recycle them, reuse them, and have 40,000 repair shops in the world.
And they even, the part of the sales proceeds and their profit, they use it to buy land that is under threat, and they preserve it and they conserve it. It's an excellent strategy. Dr. Ravi, since we are talking about leadership here, so what we are seeing today, is this not a lack of proper 21st century leadership? And how can business leaders be 21st century leaders?
I think this is an important point, because at the end of the day, the global economy of nations is made up of the global, in-country economies of businesses. So it's when you total all of that up, you end up with a national GDP with some national players. So I think both nations and businesses need 21st century leadership. So what is the difference between a 21st century leader and a 21st century national or business leader and an 18th or 19th century business leader? So in the past, what we were taught in business schools was create shareholder value, and at any cost. So create shareholder value was the only paradigm. And when I look at a majority of the business leaders in the world today, and this is not isolated to Sri Lanka, this is the commonality in the world, you find business leaders are very short-term focused. They're looking at delivering results in the next quarter.
Correct.
When Unilever's chairman, Paul Polman, took over the helm at Unilever, one of the things he said was, I'm not going to report quarterly profits. If you're interested in Unilever, invest in us for the medium to long term. We are not here to give you quarterly profits. Now, that is the thinking of a 21st century leader. And what we really need all leaders of business and nations to do is for them to first grasp the reality of the climate emergency. Because until and unless world leaders and business leaders first recognize there is a climate emergency, why would you want to respond to it? And the only way a business leader or a national leader can respond to it is if he or she understands and respects science. Because if you ignore science, and if all you're looking at is commercial business and commercial profits in the short term, you're not going to even give any time to scientific thinking. So the science is clear, the impact of the code red for humanity is clear, and the plus 1.5 degree centigrade world and a 50 degree centigrade world that BBC talks about is upon us. It is not going to happen 100 years from now, it's going to happen in the next 5 to 7 years.
Yeah.
Now, once you accept the science, then you are, as a business leader or a national leader, are going to look at what can our country do to be part of the solution? What can our business do to be part of the solution? And I would say the most important priority when I look at all these 17 UN SDG goals is look at SDG 7 and move to renewable energy, because if you keep burning fossil fuels, you will continuously heat the planet up, and we are going to be in a much bigger situation. Now, that's a simple exercise that a 21st century leader can take. And every company in the world, every company run by anyone, whether it's a national company or a business, private company or a multinational should be asking the question, how can we get to 100% renewable energy? Which is what Google has done, which is what Microsoft has done, which is what Amazon has done, which is what Tesla has done, which is what all the companies I have mentioned have done, including Unilever. So it can be done. And I can tell you personally, from some of the boards that I work on in Sri Lanka, I've been able to achieve it in 2 boards already. Because what we said was we must get to 100% renewable energy. And our president, when he went to COP26, he made a commitment that Sri Lanka will be 70% driven by renewable energy by 2030. Now, I must be very honest with you, Tarindu. That is great, because that means the president has understood the science. But I would say the biggest inhibitor to Sri Lanka getting to 70% renewable energy is, I think, in my opinion, the CEB. Because I can see that the CEB has been constantly an irritant and blocking the progress of renewables. So I think the CEB and the government and the president should be aligned to work towards getting to 70%, because at the moment they're running in 2 different directions.
Doctor, some very strong opinions and thoughts there indeed, which is why we respect you. Now, since we are talking about energy, and this is one area which I want to discuss as well, because energy sustainability is a very important part for any business and for any country. Now, they talk about solar, then they talk about the wind-based energy, and there are even discussions where some of the countries, for example, like in Japan, where they are now exploring and they're even obtaining power from tidal waves, you know, the strong waves in the sea. Yeah. But then again comes the cost comparison, where they say if you're going with those technologies, it will be about 4 times more than what you are having now. Of course, you have to consider the economies of scale, etc., and so many different aspects. Then people talk about electric technology, electric vehicles, EVs, the battery technology. There's a lot of talk about these different technologies for energy, but where do you see that the investments should be happening in terms of these energy technologies?
Okay, I'm glad you asked the question, and I'm also glad that you made a comment about the cost. I can now tell the entire audience today, the renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels in terms of energy. We have already come to that point even without batting an eyelid. I can tell you, today the renewables are cheaper. So if anyone says the reason we are not moving to in renewables is because it's more expensive than being in fossil fuels, even coal, they are absolutely not aware of what has happened in the world in the last 10, 20 years, where the cost of solar has come down 85%, where the cost of wind and all these energy sources which are renewable have become so much more effective, so much more available, and at such a much lower price. So that is no longer an excuse. And I can tell you one of the reasons that the world hasn't moved into the renewables as fast as we want it to is because of the infrastructure that has been created by the fossil fuel companies, which are actually holding back the faster progress into this. Now, I want
so there's a lot of branding campaigns and a lot of talk about going sustainable, but behind the scene, the energy is still dark, ugly, and dirty.
And one of the key points that you have already picked up, Tarindu, which I'm impressed about, is the fact that a solution to the global climate emergency can only happen if we solve the energy problem. Even if we solve every other problem on the planet, if we don't solve the energy problem, we are never going to come out of it. So let's talk about companies in the world which have made, I already mentioned 5 companies who have already proven they can be 100% renewable energy driven. Now, you talked about solar power. Let's spend a moment on solar power. Sri Lanka is a country which has 350 to 360 days of sunlight. But our total renewable energy in terms of solar power is only 1%. Whereas countries which have probably 1/3 the amount of sunlight days, maybe 50 to 100 days during summer, are in 40% and 30% renewable energy. So Sri Lanka has an absolute opportunity to expand its solar power and wind power bases. And not only that, there is also geothermal power, where in Africa many nations are moving into geothermal. Even the whole issue of nuclear is now seen as probably one of the cleanest energies you can go, building in all the controls to manage any issues like avoiding the ones we had in Fukushima. And tidal energy. So we now have a whole resource of energy. And one of the reasons solar wasn't doing too well in the past was because the efficiency of solar is about 20%, about 16 to 17%. Today, the new solar panels that are coming out are at about 29 to 30% with Jinko Solar. And there's an amazing new development happening as we speak in Germany right now, where there's a new material called perovskite, which is now going into solar panels, which is getting efficiencies nearly to the 30 to 40%. So efficiency has improved. And another important thing is batteries. Solar power needs batteries to store the energy, otherwise you're going to lose out by the end of the day when the sun goes down. And one of the things I want to urge Sri Lanka's policymakers to consider is to make solar panels duty-free, make batteries that store the solar panels like the batteries that are commercial and for home use, like what Tesla has launched all over the world called Powerwall, make it duty-free. Because at the end of the day, every 1,000 new electric vehicles on the road, every new house with renewable energy is also going to reduce your petroleum import bill. And that is the way we have to look at this. This is not about any other thing. And subsidizing petroleum, I think, is another oxymoron, because how can you be subsidizing what is causing climate emergencies? So it doesn't make sense. So energy solutions are available, battery plus solar, battery plus wind, and this is the way forward. Floating solar. Sri Lanka has 30,000 reservoirs in Sri Lanka. Yeah. We can put floating solar in some of them.
Like what Singapore is doing.
Like what Singapore is
Dr. Fernando, we are going to come back to you on more details on that. We will be back after this short break. This is BISNOMICS. Welcome back to BISNOMICS. We are in conversation with the very interesting and dynamic personality of Dr. Ravi Fernando on the very pertinent topic of sustainability. Dr. Ravi, now it was also great to see that a Sri Lankan, an expert in the field of sustainability, launching an education program for the world, not just in Sri Lanka, but for the world, I believe in Europe, in Luxembourg with the Institute of Directors, this new program on 21st century leadership. First of all, congratulations. And secondly, share with us the details of how these programs are important in shaping up today's young students and business leaders to transform into being 21st century business leaders. The forum is yours.
Excellent. So let me give a little background to this. During the COVID lockup in 2020, I came across...
Nice word, lock up. We were locked up at home. Yes.
I came across an amazing book called 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And this is written by Yuval Noah Harari, a PhD from Oxford, and now considered one of the best futurists and people who understand the world. I read this book and I was stunned by it. I was completely floored by it. And I said, here are 21 lessons every single business leader and every single national leader should know about. And then I did a small investigation in terms of global curriculums at MBA programs, governance programs, to see if any of those 21 lessons that he's talking about is being taught to the future leaders of the world. Because if they don't understand what are the 21 lessons for the 21st century, then how are we going to move forward? And I realized that hardly anyone was doing this. So what I did at that time was create a program called create a model called the 21st Century Board Leadership Model. And I basically wrote up this model with 6 modules, and I'll talk about each of the modules in a moment, and sent a note out to the Institute of Directors of Luxembourg and also to the INSEAD Business School and said, I think we need to teach this to all future leaders. And what I did was cluster all 21 lessons into 6 modules and send this proposal out. And in the module that I created for creating 21st century leaders, I said we need to first get all leaders totally tuned in to to the climate emergency and the emergencies the world is facing with. So what are the emergencies the world faces? The world is facing three emergencies. We have the climate emergency, which is the code red for humanity, but we also have a health and social emergency. We have just seen COVID-19 basically wipe out quite a bit of economic gain in many countries and shut down economies. And then we have the resulting economic emergency. So a climate emergency, health and social emergency, and the economic emergency. These are the emergencies. And every business leader needs to be totally understanding these three emergencies. And if you don't have a science of precision, you're not going to even begin to think about it. So the massive deforestation that has happened in the world,
correct,
which is to the tune of about 75 to 80% of all forest cover, is one of the reasons we are seeing a massive rise in pandemics.
And Dr. Ravi, also to add, I did read in one of the new case studies you have published for the government of Singapore about making it a sustainable living city. And I believe this is an extract also from another document you'd shared, that by 2050, about 70% of the world will be living in cities, but cities are only about 1% of the total land in this world. So 70% being cramped into 1%, that doesn't sound like a world I would like to be living in.
I mean, that's the recipe for disaster for pandemics. So I want to get back to the health and social emergency and how deforestation led to it. If you look at the last 10 years, we have seen Ebola, we have seen MERS, we have seen H1N1, we have seen COVID-19, we have seen a whole host of, a plethora of pandemics.
And as we speak right now, I believe in Hong Kong, there has been another new pandemic that
Delta variant.
Exactly. I believe it's supposed to be spreading at a faster rate than COVID, and once again found in one of the fish markets.
Okay, so now the point I'm trying to make is, when we destroy nature, when we destroy our forest cover, the birds and the animals living in it then end up getting caught into the wet markets of the world. And majority of these pandemics are all starting in the wet markets in Asia. Wuhan in China, in Vietnam, in South Korea, in Indonesia, in Malaysia. These wet markets are now full of all these animals that are getting caught. And then the blood, where as you start getting them ready for consumption, is now coming into contact with human beings. And because of the global connectivity and because of the global congestion of populations, now we have an explosion of pandemics. We have an explosion of these illnesses. I mean, this is now unprecedented. So there's a connection to the climate emergency and health and social emergency. So in the module we created was the three emergencies, and then which need urgent attention, which needs action. To just give you a simple example, when you move a patient into the emergency room or the ICU room, do the doctors say, we'll come and treat this patient next week? Do the doctors say, let's look at the patient in a year's time? No. They go immediately and start attacking the problem. Now, what the world leaders did at COP26 was to say,
come back later.
We have an emergency, we have a climate emergency, yes, we are burning too much fossil fuels, but let's keep burning it till 2040, 2050. One country actually said we'll keep burning it till 2070, right? So the countries which have really gone and messed the whole COP26 up are countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like even China, countries like India, who actually said we'll look at this in 2070.
And Dr. Ravi, sometimes, we see the rich countries, the developed countries are actually burning fossil fuel and damaging the planet, but the impact is sometimes experienced by the lesser developed countries.
Absolutely.
I believe the Honduras president said it's time that the world started paying them back because they are more like at the epicenter of so many different climate emergencies.
So I'm going to give you a statistic. 93% of cumulative greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere have come from the developed countries. So this is the reality, 93%. And the rest of the world is 7%. So there is a massive responsibility on developed countries to look at the climate emergency and support the energy transition. I want to keep focusing on the energy transition and reforestation. So in our module, the second part of our module that I created was to look at the three disruptors that are attacking us. So where there is a technological disruption, from artificial intelligence to nanotechnology to a whole host of technologies like robotics, like 3D printing, like precision agriculture, a whole host of technologies are disrupting the world. And we need, 21st century leaders need to understand that. The second disruption is coming from geopolitics. There's a massive amount of geopolitical maneuvering that's happening as we speak, whether it is the China One Belt, One Road, whether it is what Russia is doing in Europe, whether
that
it
whole
is
Eurasian thing, and they are trying to hold the entire Europe at ransom for energy supply.
Energy supply, and then what America is doing. So there are three big geopolitical actors: the Chinese, the Russians, and the Americans. And actually, these are the three that are basically now calling the shots on the global economy. So we are also seeing geopolitical disruption, and world leaders and business leaders of the 21st century can't say, I didn't know about it. So we need to teach them about this and get them up to speed, whether it is Brexit or what is happening in the world, they need to understand. And the final element is governance disruption. And governance disruption is something that is happening quite openly, where business leaders are putting profit before planet and people. So we saw that happen with COVID. If you look at the three countries which have the highest number of COVID deaths today, what are the countries? The USA, followed by Brazil, followed by India. 650 to 700,000 dead in the US, nearly 600,000 dead in Brazil, and you have India at about 500 to 600,000. Now, what is common about all three of these countries is its leadership opened the economies way before it should have, and did not run after the vaccination programs and the COVID programs.
Dr. Fernando, to be honest, I think US hardly closed when Donald Trump was president. He was reluctant to
Absolutely.
have any lockdowns.
So that is a classic example of an 18th century leader who is science denying. And this is what the world is suffering from. However, we saw as
and even
soon
in
as
Europe, Dr. Ravi, correct me if I'm wrong, but even in Europe, we see the rising cases because comparatively with the rest of the world, Europe is one region where vaccination rates have been very slow.
Absolutely. So one of the things that, I mean, I would like to look at Brazil as a case in point.
Yes.
Brazil is a nation which denied the existence of a climate emergency and devastated the Amazon forest like never before. Correct. The Amazon forest used to give the world 20% of the oxygen. Today it's giving 0%.
Correct. And correct me if I'm wrong once again, Dr. Ravi, Amazon is called the lungs of the earth.
Earth lung.
Yeah. However, and it's the biggest absorber of carbon, used to be, but
now it's zero.
Yeah. And now at a point, if the forest gets damaged beyond that certain point of no return, which I believe we have already crossed, it will go on to release all the carbon it has absorbed. So now it becomes the biggest polluter of the planet.
From being the earth lung.
Yeah.
So I hold Brazil's leader completely accountable for this.
And
Bolsonaro.
He was even saying, if you want the Amazon saved, you should pay us.
Yeah. I mean, I think the situation is that everyone is talking about us and them when we are all in the us. When the planet goes down, we all go down.
Correct.
People can't say we are going to be fine, they are going to be bad.
No planet, no people.
No planet, no people, no business.
Yes.
And this is the simple thing about BISNOMICS. I mean, if we don't have people and a devastated planet, how are we going to do it? So Brazil's leader rejected the climate emergency. He went on to reject the COVID-19. He was actually telling people, don't wear masks. He was actually going around even with a loudhailer saying that. Now, I am happy to see that finally, the Brazilian Senate held him accountable on 3 or 4 charges, and they are now going to hold him. The Attorney General is now looking at basically moving him out, and they have filed a case in the International Court of Justice as basically compromising the humanity of the world.
Correct.
From his actions. So that is the 18th, 19th century leader.
Yes.
But some of us might not be as bad as Bolsonaro, but not taking this urgency to the climate emergency is as bad.
And so, Dr. Fernando, we do definitely wish you all the best with this new program. It's exciting for us to see that a Sri Lankan, a world-class Sri Lankan, as I always call you, taking this knowledge to the world, and it's a proud moment, so congratulations on that. On a final question, I would like to ask you, back again focusing on Sri Lanka, what are the leverageable resources that we have as a country? Because people always say that we are a nation sitting on a gold mine of resources and then going with the begging bowl to the rest of the world. Every time we speak to a country, it seems to be we are trying to borrow from them. It's a pathetic situation to be in as a country. It's a pathetic situation to see in the news as a Sri Lankan. So my question to you, what are the resources? I've heard at a recent conference where you said everyone talks of Ceylon tea. Why not Ceylon water? And then you've been a huge supporter of graphene and then graphite. What are the leverageable resources that this country can build on?
Okay, just before that, let me just let the audience know the 21st Century Leadership Board Leadership Master Class is now run in Luxembourg, and
Yes.
there's our fourth cohort there. We also run it in Ireland and UK. We also run it in Sri Lanka through the Chartered Accountants, and we do one course a year. That's it.
Congratulations on that, sir.
And we are also moving to Vietnam and to India in 2022.
Fantastic.
Okay. So that's where the 21st Century Leadership course is. And I believe the content of that is unique because hardly any MBA program or any course that is being taught today are teaching the subjects I just talked to you about.
For sure, for sure.
Okay, now getting on to Sri Lanka. So
The leverageable resources.
Yeah. So my proudest moment in Sri Lanka is when I had an opportunity to be the first CEO of Sri Lanka Institute of Nanotechnology. Slintech. And when I got into that position, after having spent about 17 years working internationally, I decided I was going to do something world-class for Sri Lanka. And the first thing I did was to try and identify what are the leverageable resources Sri Lanka has. And now let me tell you what I found out from my research. The most leverageable, the key unique resources we have in Sri Lanka. I want to start with the resources that were created by the late kings like Parakramabahu in terms of rainwater harvesting technology and hydrology in 1157 BC. And I can tell you, Ceylon water management skills and expertise, if there was going to be a world consultancy for water management, Ceylon water management should have been there all over the place. Because the amazing vision of King Parakramabahu and everyone
may not even a drop of water that falls to the lands of this country go back to the sea without being used by the people.
There we go. Now what happened after that? So we were at a time collecting almost 80-90% of our rainwater. Now we have 30,000 rainwater collecting bodies, but they are all silted. So we are now only collecting 29% of our rainwater. Whereas Singapore, which is now positioning itself as the global water hub, has already got 75% sorted out, collecting water and saving the water in reservoirs. So we need to desilt our 30,000 tanks. So Ceylon water management expertise, I believe, is a leverageable skill.
Like how the Dutch are there for the salvation of the ships and the maritime expertise.
Exactly. So I think that is one that Sri Lanka should leverage. The others are to do with sustainable tourism. Sri Lanka has one of the most amazing countries on the planet in terms of the beauty of the nation and some of the places we have in Sri Lanka. But we keep telling people to come to Sri Lanka and enjoy the beach. Sri Lanka is not a beach only. Sri Lanka has so much more. In fact, Sigiriya should really be the eighth wonder of the planet. And to me, our anchor destination, attraction should be Sigiriya. So that's sustainable tourism. Now let me talk about...
Things built by 21st century leaders, but back in the centuries.
Absolutely. So we had engineering that was world-class, that was able to build Sigiriya, but what has happened to that after that? So we have two areas, hydrology knowledge and engineering knowledge. We should be bringing those back to world class. The three minerals that Sri Lanka is sitting on, which have all been exported in gunny bag form from the time that we got independence for 75 years ago, and we are getting gunny bag prices for these three minerals. But we should be looking at value-added exports going from Sri Lanka.
And these three minerals are?
And these three minerals are, number one is graphite. Sri Lanka is having the world's purest graphite, which is 99.8% pure, and our graphite is in veins of graphite, which makes it even purer. Now, what do we do with it? There was a time during the World War II and World War I, Sri Lanka had 300 graphite mines operation. We were exporting 40 to 50,000 tons of graphite. Today, we have 6 graphite mines working and exporting about 10,000 metric tons. I'm telling you, graphite is a gold mine Sri Lanka should have, and with graphite you can move into graphene, which is now the world's most advanced water desalination treatment that is being talked about by the World Economic Forum. And the University of Manchester, 2 scientists there, got the Nobel Prize for Physics in 2010 for inventing graphene. And we should be looking at graphene as a water desalination opportunity. So first one. The second one that Sri Lanka has is titanium. Our ilmenite, which is available in the Pulmude area mainly, is the world's purest ilmenite in terms of conversion to titanium. So it has about 73.8%. And that's the second one that we should leverage. The third one is in Eppavala, we have rock phosphate. And at the moment, we are importing all our fertilizer. Our Eppavala rock phosphate should be a key element that we should add value and get companies to come and produce it here and export it. All these 3 items, we should be inviting technology joint ventures to set up the manufacturing of value-added products like graphene-led water desalination, graphene-led batteries, supercapacitors. We should not be putting gunny bags of graphite. We should be having batteries. We should be having water desalination units. We should be having nano titanium to clean up all the high-rise windows in the planet. So Sri Lanka is sitting on a gold mine. All we need is to realize we can't exploit this alone, to form joint ventures with the world's best, and then look at only exporting value-added exports from those 3 products, put them on the China One Belt, One Road, and Sri Lanka should be a $10,000 per capita nation. And I'm proud to say that at Slintech, I was able to lead Slintech to create 6 global US patents. But these patents were done in 2010, and not one of them have in 2021, I was out of Sri Lanka and I just came back in 2018, have been exploited or commercialized.
Dr. Ravi Fernando, informative, inspirational as always. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. We hope that the right people heard this, the business leaders, the authorities of the country, hears these words and takes a necessary action, because as you said, we have the resources. What we need is 21st century proper leadership at a country level, organizational level, to take the country in the right direction. Thank you so much, and best of luck with all the good work that you are doing.
Thank you, Tarinder, and all the best to you.
No matter what business you may be in, there is always a sustainable approach. And make sure that your organization is being led with the values of the 21st century leadership. I'm Fernando, and no matter what business you may be in, have a profitable week ahead.